Well, hello
Got it.
everyone, and welcome. Today is Thursday, May the 30th. It's 5 o'clock in North Carolina, and I'm Wes Fryer, and who's in Manhattan, Kansas? And what time is it there?
It's 4 o'clock in Manhattan as I play around with my screen here, and I'm Tom Fryer, and I'm younger than Alice.
Do we want to admit, why don't we all share when we were born? I was born in August 20th of 1970. Dad, when were you born?
Well, where were you born?
I was born in Phoenix, Arizona, where we only lived for a few years, as I do not recall, but I was told.
Yeah, and I was born August 21st, 1940, in Powell, Wyoming.
All right. And what time is it in Hawaii today on
It's
Oahu?
11:02 a.m. and I was born in Kapiolani Hospital in Honolulu, the territory of Hawaii, in 10/16/38.
Oh my gosh. And who are you?
Oh, I'm Alice Juliet Lehuilani Rogers.
And we have wanted to have this conversation for a long time, and we are so excited that we're here. So now you were born in the territory of Hawaii because it was 1951 when Hawaii became a state, I guess.
1959, as a matter of
Oh
fact.
my gosh. Wow. I know Oklahoma was 1907 just because that's we had the centennial.
Alaska beat us to it by what, 1 month or something like that?
Wow. Wow. So what stories did your parents tell you about when you were born and what was going on at that time, or any details that you remember being told?
Well, I kind of was following on what I sent you last night, that whole written thing. So I'm going to start with mom. Mom was born in Dolan, South Dakota, and in a day of, of 10 surviving kids, as a matter of fact. Grandma had lost a few children, had lost a few children, as happened in a lot of farm families. And there is a 100-page thing that Grandpa wrote on a typewriter on onion skin paper, which is in the possession of Glenda, who I turned all of the Fryer genealogy folders over to. And he was the first farmer to get electricity. And why don't you tell me where he put the electricity?
In the kitchen?
Any ideas where he put it?
I'd put it in the kitchen, I guess.
Wrong. Tom, you got a guess?
No,
Well, thinking about the barn, maybe if you needed to
The
have
barn, absolutely, the
needed
barn,
power.
to keep the animals warm during the winter.
Oh, heat. Yeah, South Dakota was and still is a bit of a chilly place in the winter.
I remember Mom talking about when she couldn't take the horse to school, she had to walk through the I don't know, 4 or 5 foot drifts of ice and snow and everything. That ought to have been fun. But
when did they so the history there, the family came from South Dakota. There were 3 sisters that all came together to Hawaii. Is that right?
There's 3 sisters that came and stayed. Floss and Nell both were over here at some given time. The only sister that was not a teacher and did not teach in Hawaii was the oldest one, Caroline.
Okay.
And so all of these girls put them through. Now, Mom went to Reading, I believe it is. I got kind of confused about that. But anyway, they all put themselves through. And Mom was the youngest sister, of course. So Floss and Elsie and Jewel were already teaching and may have already been in Hawaii because they came evidently in the early 1920s, maybe. I'm not sure about that, but I'm guessing based on the area. So Mom was the last one to go to Hawaii, and so in the day when women did not travel alone, if they traveled at all, these women were absolutely go-getters. And it's just amazing what they what they did. And so what about mom, when mom died, and I was going through, I'm burping here, was going through her stuff, and I came upon this folded up piece of paper, beige paper, and it was like 12 inches by 12 inches by 12 inches. And I unfurled the thing, and there was writing on the back of it. And I unfurled the bloody thing, and it was a calendar from the ship Malolo, which I will get to later on. And along with all of that, she had all these onion skin pages in, and they all had that beautiful script writing. They all had that beautiful script writing. And at first I didn't figure out who it was. And then I realized, oh, it's mom's, because the writing had changed somewhat. And she was talking about going across on the train, wherever the train was, to Washington, to Seattle, to catch a ship to Hawaii. And I'm reading all of this, and I did transcribe it, and I don't know what I did with it, but I did transcribe it. Anyway, so she put all this down, and she told how she turned up at Punahou on contract for a year, and a lot of these teachers were in contracts.
No, and that was at Punahou School.
Yeah, at Punahou School, and
that was the school that I got to visit briefly when we were there in 2007, and still going strong. And it's really quite an amazing school.
Now, you mentioned Reading, but I was thinking they all graduated from Brookings, from South Dakota.
Well, that's what I said. I'm confused. I think you're right. I think it's Brookings. I think I went back and found it, and it was Brookings. I just get confused about, because I was there. I was there with Uncle Bob and Aunt oh God, I'm having a brain fade. Bob's wife, Dorothy, and Mom, and all four of us went to that university, and we saw a lightning strike the tree and put it in half. I mean, talk about, oh boy. Anyway, but yeah, I think it's Brookings.
Well, in fact, my recollection, 9 of the 10 graduated there. Bob, I think, went there maybe one semester, and then he graduated from North Dakota.
Right.
And then went to Phoenix. Yeah.
So did your mom just teach the 1 year at Punahou, or did she?
Yeah, so she was on contract for the 1 year at Punahou, and she was teaching like home ec or something like that, sewing and stuff like that. I don't know what I put it down in the paper I sent you.
Right.
Anyway, and in those days, females were not left unchaperoned, if you remember.
Right.
Even when I grew up in Hawaii, I was chaperoned. And that's in the 50s. But anyway, so it turned out that my mother was, with Elsie and Jewel and stuff, and they were both married. And so Elsie decided to give her a welcome party, and needed a young man. They needed a not a chaperone, but an accompanist. And so Charlie was the maintenance supervisor down at the Bonham Young Hotel, and he said, "Oh, well, I have this wonderful young man." And so this wonderful young man happened to be Ralph Sterling Rogers. And he took one look at the redhead and said, "Oh my God," or whatever he said. And he fell head over heels in love and stayed that way for the next 75 years, whatever. And so that was how, and the mom kept saying, no, because he kept asking her to marry, and she kept saying, no. Well, 2 weeks before she was to go on a sabbatical trip to Japan with her girlfriend, she said yes to Dad, and they got married. And so they had the wedding at Aunt Jewel's house, and they stayed at Aunt Jewel's house. And Uncle Russ was there as a submariner at the time, and they all stood on the dock waving goodbye to Mom. So, and let's go back to Dad. Dad was born in Denver, Colorado. Not quite sure about what was going on there because there's not a lot of records, and there was a big fire in Colorado that destroyed a lot of records. From what I understand, supposedly Grandma Rogers got divorced from Dad's father, Charles. Why? I don't know, but he was a miner and he went on down to New Mexico or someplace like that. That's in the records. Anyway, and then it was all silver towns, silver and gold towns, mining towns in that area. And so there's a lot of discussion about Grandma Rogers, and in her stuff, she talks about how she was raised and everything else. So I have yet another thing in the Rogers genealogy where I've copied off all of her sayings and stories and stuff. Anyway,
did you ever know her?
yes, I did. Yes, I did. Yes, I did. Actually, I knew her in Hawaii, but I was a very young person at that point. Anyway, so Dad and Grandma and all the rest of the family, Sikoras and everybody, they all moved to Long Beach in different spots of Long Beach. And Grandma and great grandma ran a bakery on Atlantic that was very successful, and it was destroyed in the 1933 earthquake.
Mm.
And so Grandma went to Hawaii shortly thereafter. But I'm back to Dad, and he went to Long Beach Polytechnic. I have a little bookcase that he made, still in my possession, that he made while he was at Long Beach Polytechnic. He was captain of the water polo team, and he evidently was fairly good at school. The interesting part of that is, and this is where I'm zooming in, is he had his buddy Stan Nesser, who I also knew. And Stan Nesser and him were surfer dudes. And this is in Long Beach before that damn bloody breakwater was built, which destroyed the surfing. And of course, the breakwater was to help the ships get in and out, whatever.
Oh, wow.
And destroyed. Anyway, so he turned up at the bakery 7 days a week at 4 o'clock in the morning. And he would set up all of the dough that needed rising, the rolls and everything, and bread and everything that needed to be risen. He was in charge of getting all of it ready, because then grandma and great grandma would come in about 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, and then he'd go on to school and do his polo stuff and whatever. And he'd be back at 4 o'clock in the afternoon washing pots and pans and dishes and stuff. So they wanted to surf, and the bakery was open 6 days a week. So he and Stan would show up early in the morning on Sunday, and they would scrape all the dough off the floors and clean all the pots and pans and rada. And then they'd take off to the beach and they would surf. And this is very important, because when the bakery got destroyed, it was Depression time, and there were no jobs for single young men. Now, somewhere along the line, Dad went to UCLA for a short time. I just know that he said so. I don't have any records, but he went for a short time. And then he and Stan decided, they heard that Hawaii was the Gold Coast. And it was. At that point, it was the Gold Coast. And so they decided that they were going, and surfing was there.
When you say the Gold Coast, do you mean just like the frontier, the exciting place to be? What do you mean by the Gold Coast? What does that mean?
All the tourists came over on the ships, and diamonds and gold and furs. It was
where the money was. It's where the money was.
It was the Gold Coast.
Okay, gotcha.
And so anyway, he and Stan went to all the shipping companies. Nobody was hiring, because they would hire a married man with children or a married man. So they stowed away. Now, remember I talked about the ship Malolo. That's the ship that they went over on, that they stowed away on, was the Manolo. It was one of the 5 Matson ships. The 5 Matson ships were Lurleen, Matsonia, Monterey, Mariposa, and Manolo. They stowed away. Now the crew knew they were on board probably almost immediately and gave them food and everything else. They didn't get caught until about, because in those days the ship took about, I would say about 10 days or to make the trip, because remember they were slow and they had shortwave radios, but they didn't have, when you talk about 1933, 34 versus now, you understand there was nothing. I mean, there was no communication efforts, and the only thing you had was shortwave, and you were on your own out there. Yeah. Anyway, I guess he caught them up. He caught my dad up in the library reading. The captain did. And so he threw him in the brig at night, and during the day they had to work with the crew. And he shortwaved ahead. Again, you couldn't turn around and go back. You had to keep going to Hawaii because in those days, that's what you had to do. And the big Hawaiian comps, and of course, I had knowledge of the big Hawaiian comps also. They stood about 6 feet, at least 6 feet tall, weighed 250, and they basically broke up the bar fights down on Hotel Street. They didn't use anything but their hands. They would just grab the sailors by the scruff of their necks and bang their heads together. They were huge. Anyway, so they met the boat. Well, the captain did something. There were 2 ways to go, that they could have been in jail or released on their own recognizance. So the captain evidently put in a good word for Dad, and so they were told they stayed in the brig overnight, in jail overnight. But they never found the money belt that Grandma, wily old character that she was, had sewn into Dad's belt. They never found it. Anyway, so they went before the judge with all the drunks and the murderers and the whatevers, that Dad talked about that. And the judge let him off and said, you've got a year to pay back the ship, and you've got 30 days to find yourself a job, and 30 days to find yourself someplace to live, and you got to stay on the straight and narrow, or you're going to be back here and you're going to go to jail. So the 2 of them took off walking, didn't have much money, took off walking down to Waikiki from Honolulu. And they went by this place, Mrs. Oh God, I'm having a terrible time with brain fade. It's in the paperwork. Anyway, a boarding house down in Waikiki. And so Dad paid in advance 30 days.
Mrs. Willard's boarding.
Mrs. Willard.
Yeah.
Mrs. Willard. And and so I'm glad I sent that to you. Anyway, so they paid in advance and went across the street to all the surfer dudes at the beach down there on Waikiki. And they basically surfed for 30 days until the money was about to run out. So Dad walked all the way down to Honolulu. There were buses in those days of some sort, but he walked all the way downtown to the first guy. And the first guy said, well, he didn't have anything at the time, but he knew somebody who did. And it happened to be at the Van Young Hotel. Anyway, so Dad, the cleaner, the Young Laundry was part of the Van Young Hotel. So anyway, Dad gets a job for $1 an hour in 1933 or 1934.
Wow.
Well, he comes back and tells Stan, well, then Stan goes down to the other laundry company and he gets a job for $1 an hour too, or whatever. So Dad worked himself up. He was only on what they called the dump run for about a month because he was such a hard worker that promoted him to the Waikiki Run. Now, the Waikiki Run was all the hotels, and it was all the Gold Coast and all the laundry, and it was the premier cleaning company place to be. So he was there for a year. And then I guess the guy that was his supervisor was a drunk. And I remember Dad talking about taking the drunk home and putting him into bed and going back in the truck and taking care of the route. So whatever. But anyway, after about a year, Grandma Rogers, and I don't know where Floyd came in, but Floyd was the younger brother of Charles, who Grandma Rogers was married to first, who was Dad's father. It's very convoluted. Anyway, she had gotten married to him. Anyway, somehow or another they moved, and nothing is very clear about this. They moved to Seattle to run a hotel, which they lost when the Depression was full force. They lost it, and they came back to Long Beach. Well, Floyd and Dad had been kingpin of the operation. Well, under Floyd, he wasn't kingpin anymore. So he up and left and went back to Hawaii. And that's when he went to work for Von Young Hotel as a hotel clerk. And the maitre d' up above, and I don't know, again, I don't know the time frame, decided to retire. So he basically gave Dad his some of his stuff, and Dad went to Salvation Army and got the white shirts and whatever else he needed so that he could be hotel clerk and maitre d' up there because it was a very posh place. I remember seeing the Von M. Young Hotel. It was right down on Beretania. And I mean, it was 6 or 7 stories, and it was a very posh place. And that is how he knew my Uncle Charlie, who was married to Aunt Elsie. And that is how they met at dinner.
Okay.
So, it's, and you have to remember Hawaii was a very small area. It was very small, very, very limited, and very much like Dolan, South Dakota, perhaps, and Huron and stuff. It wasn't very big.
Well, and the timetable we're talking about is still the 30s, the Depression, right?
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, the courtship went on, and then in 1937, they're all standing at the dock waving goodbye to Mom as she's going on sabbatical to Japan with her girlfriend. And I do have a quote in the thing, Wesley, that you noticed, that Charlie and Tommy both said there's something really wrong with this. That Mom was going. Well, anyway, so Mom comes back because she had a contract in Ritzville. They all had contracts, and so she gets off the ship in Seattle, takes the train to Ritzville, and reports for duty. Well, the state of Washington did not allow married teachers. Men probably, but not women.
Wow.
Yeah, they did not, and that didn't change. That didn't change until about 20 or 30 years ago.
Isn't that
I
crazy?
know that affected Floss too.
Yes, it did. That's why she never admitted that she was married.
Yes.
Wow.
None of us, all of us guessed, but none of us knew for sure.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
Oh,
exactly right. And so anyway, Mom, and then there's the funny story. Mom reports for duty, and fortunately she wasn't pregnant. So I don't know what they did, but they did something. Anyway, I have the story there about the car, the Packard.
Mm-hmm.
And Dad makes the arrangement with the big Packard company down in town in Honolulu. And, they're going to get it directly from the factory in Detroit. And so he arranges to have Hawaiian license plates flown up there to Ritzville or Seattle, or to meet up with the car, whatever. And so mom is walking home from work, and this strange man in front of this Packard car comes up to her and hands the keys into her hands. And she says, "What is this for?" And, I expect she knew the jig was up because she looked at the Packard with the Hawaiian plates, and she knew the jig was up. So it wasn't a month before she was back on a ship going back to Hawaii.
With the car.
With the car.
Wow.
So, and I don't know much about their young lives, but I have some of it that I've gleaned from various sources and stuff. And they didn't have much money, and mom was working. I mean, because they needed teachers.
Were they living in Honolulu the whole time?
Yeah, they were living in Honolulu, down in Waikiki. Sometimes they were with Aunt Jewel, and sometimes they were across the street in the cabanas over there, which are now gone. And they were on Olahana and some other places. I haven't been able to track down all the places that they were, but they would rent apart. And then remember, we're talking 1937 here, and all of a sudden, and mom is pregnant, and I arrive in October 38. And then my brother arrives in February of 41. And December 7th happens.
That's right.
So I have no idea how the military tracked him down, but somehow or another at UCLA, he had some kind of metalworking shop or something. I don't know what. And the military tracked him down and told him he was, this was after Hickam was burned, was bombed and everything else. And all the planes were in shambles on the runways. And, but he's never worked on them, but he had some, anyway, the
military knew he had metal skills.
Yeah, they were taking anybody and everybody that they could.
Right.
Everybody that, and I mentioned in there where my gal friend across the street, who is dead now, she was 10 years older than I was, and the kids would go to school either in the morning or in the afternoon, and the other half of the day they went on jobs. They were out there digging trenches or whatever the hell. I've seen some stuff on that. They were out there working.
Rosie the Riveter.
Yeah, they were working. They were whatever they were assigned to do. All of the kids, every kid that was over 10 years of age was out there working.
Okay.
During the war.
Well, I've heard you tell this story a little bit. I was thinking you were older. You were just barely 3 years old.
I was just barely 3 years old.
But you do have a recollection of that day. What are your recollections of December 7th, 1941?
Well, very, very, very vague. Very vague. Just what I do remember is all the noise of people yelling and screaming, not of bombing because we were far enough away. But
now, to back up for a second, at this point in time, you were living. Was it called St. Louis Heights?
It was called. It's the name of it is Maunalani, and Maunalani existed.
Okay, but when did you move there? Because you mentioned earlier living down
1942. It's in the stuff that Wes has got. It was in 1942.
Okay.
So you remember lots of noise and people yelling, and
yeah, I remember a lot of screaming and yelling and stuff, and I have no other knowledge than that. What I do remember though is the gas mask that we had to wear 24 hours a day. I also remember being in Aunt Jewel's house, and everybody talked about the blackout in California. You haven't seen blackout until you saw the blackout that we had over there. If a dog, cat, bird, anything made any noise, they were summarily executed. Period. And you were not allowed. I mean, you had heavy black curtains in a humid climate like that. I can imagine in Waikiki, very heavy black curtains. And so if they went by and saw one little speck of light, you were fined. They came up to the door and you were fined right then and there. So, and
So do you remember hearing planes or anything about the attack or any smoke?
I
or any of
remember
that
the
stuff?
planes later. I remember the planes later because the Japanese were still flying over us. They were still flying over us after 1941. And that's what I was going to say when the cars, well, now dad had a car by that time because he had to get back and forth to Hickam. I don't remember when they got the car. I don't know. I have no idea. Anyway, they could not drive with any lights. And the reason for it is because you could see it from up above. But the other thing is that you had to go very slowly because the engine gives off heat and heat rises and the planes up there could see it or whatever. Anyway, they were very, very cautious about any traveling at night and everything because of the heat from the car goes up. And so that it would be seen by the planes up above. What all of that meant, I don't understand. I was a young kid.
So World War II is really one of the first things that you probably remember because it just affected your whole life in terms of how you all had to live and just in so many ways.
And I don't remember but I do remember some things. And one of them that I put down in the material there is when we were at Aunt Jules. And I remember that specifically because it was a full moon night and it was cold to me. Tom and I were on either side of Mom and we were in pajamas and barefooted and running down the sidewalk and around the corner where the Rosalie apartments are at Alawai and Lures. Was the bomb shelter. It was a dirt shelter, and it had hardwood benches, and it was all dirt. There was, I mean, when you were in there, that's all you smelled was dirt. And I do remember being on either side of Mom and running with a full moon and cold and sitting in that dirt shelter.
Was there a bombing attack that happened, or it was just a false
no,
alarm?
And well, it was the air raid sirens went off. Like I said, the Japanese were still overflying us. I don't know why, how, or I just don't know. What was going on, but they were still overflying us.
So did you start school? Did you start first grade during World War II? Was there kindergarten?
I started kindergarten at Punahou because Mom was back teaching at Punahou.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, she was back teaching at Punahou. And I have a real hatred on for Punahou, as I told you years ago. Because Punahou is a rich bitch school. and it still is. And it doesn't make any difference what nationality you are, it's a rich bitch school. So something must have set me off because and I must have pitched a bitch, which I could do very well, evidently. And from everything that's been said about me by everybody, I started school at Ali Iolani in the English Standard School System after the start of second grade.
Okay.
So I'll have all my classmates, we're getting fewer, that we still go out to lunch together. I've only known them since second grade. So, and we still go out to lunch together and avoid COVID and everything else. Anyway, so yes, I started school and I actually found in Mom's stuff a newspaper article with, by God, I'm in it. It was a picture of her teaching class in Punahou. And so I must have found it in all of her stuff because I've spent a great deal of time going through lots and lots of stuff.
Right.
As I said in the material there, they moved around a lot. Because dad was down in the Caroline Islands with I tell you about that, and that's where he got his name, Buck Rogers. At that time there was comics called Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon.
Right.
And dad with the name Rogers became Buck, and he had a buddy that was Gordon, and he became Flash Gordon. And that's how he got the name. And he was the only one the only Rogers in the telephone book for years, under Buck Rogers.
Yeah, I've got somebody at the door. I'll be right back, but keep going.
Okay.
So what do you remember about those early days of school? Did you all write on slates? Did you have Big Chief tablets and pencils? Did you have textbooks?
All I remember about school is I always liked school, by the way. As I remember, we had those desks with that funny bench. You know what I'm talking about? And it had a thing for an an ink bottle or whatever. You know, those kind of desks. We had those kind of desks and stuff for years. And generally I was in the front. Sometimes I was in the back. I was generally in trouble with something or other later on. So I don't really remember much about school, although I've got all of my report cards. Mom kept them all. I've got all of my annuals. They're all sitting behind me in this office here.
Wow.
Have my swimming medals. I have my French pen pal in high school and stuff. I have oh God, there it goes. Let me get rid of this really quick. Roger, I'm on a Zoom call with Wes. So can I give you a call back later? All right, bye. Anyway, what is he doing off work?
So you're a swimmer. So tell me a little bit about the ocean.
Let me go back a bit. I missed that completely. I don't even think I put that in. Aunt Elsie was the swimmer. Mom had polio, and so she had a weak right leg, I think it was, because Uncle Bob and Uncle Russ used to put her in the wagon, supposedly playing with her, would put her in the wagon and they would pull her and then dump her out on the ground. So she would tell that story. So, I mean, that's Uncle Bob. Anyway.
Dad, you'll have to unmute. When you were at the door, I muted you. So if you click unmute, you'll be able to talk again.
What? Who? What?
I muted Dad. So Dad, you'll just have to click unmute. So we can hear you.
Anyway, Aunt Elsie, I think I was all of a year old, perhaps. And she took me down to Waikiki and threw me in.
Okay.
And that's how they didn't have swimming. I mean, they had swimming lessons, but I went to the YWCA later on for swimming lessons, and I was on the swim team and blah, blah, blah.
You got it, Dad.
Yeah, Aunt Elsie took me down to the beach and threw me in.
And you probably never forgot that.
No, I still have a vivid memory of it, believe it or not. And of course, she didn't throw me in way far out. She threw me in near the shore. Sure. So obviously I could get my pudgy little feet on the ground and get myself out. But she would take me swimming all the time. So because she was the swimmer. Aunt Jewel wouldn't get near the ocean, and Mom carefully because of her leg. Now Dad, of course, polo team, swimmer, so there it is.
You had it in the blood.
Yeah. So anyway, so there are some things that I remember, and I have another piece of paper that I've got to redo that gives a lot of memories of different places, but I have more work to do. So I'll send them to you when I get it done. But anyway, because I've got duplication and stuff going on.
What are some of your favorite memories with your parents when you were growing up?
Well, Dad and Mom were out there swimming, and we go to Queen Surf, and the Queen Surf was Fozzie got rid of it because it was whatever tourist area or whatever. Anyway, Queen Surf was a bunch of ponds with bamboo and all kinds of flowers and all kinds of bushes and stuff. So we didn't have a lot of money. Remember, in those days, most everybody didn't have a lot of money except Ponaho,
That's right.
And there was big bucks over there. Always has been, still is. Big
That's right.
bucks.
Yep.
But you know, the majority of us were middle class or less than.
Yep.
And so the Queen Surf was, so we would on the off chance that we got to go out to dinner, which was very rare, because Mom was an excellent cook. All of them that came out of Dolan were excellent cooks because they had to be. Anyway, we would eat our dinner quickly, and then we would go out there and we would come in muddy, wet, dirty, swampy, everything else. And the Willows was like that because you know, these are all fancy places. And Laui Chai, oh my God, we would go to Laui Chai, and it had all the great big Chinese statues and the ponds along the entrance. And oh my God, we were in hog heaven whenever we got to go someplace like that. But you know, those places are all long gone, you know, and but we Mom and Dad didn't have a lot of money during the war years and stuff. And as you see from the stuff, they didn't buy the first house until Trousseau. And there's a thing there that Mom wrote about the couch and everything else, which I found in all of her stuff. And I put it in there. So that gives you an idea of what it was like. And Dad washing diapers. And the next thing he did was go down to Hawaiian Electric and buy a washing machine. And then I talk about Trousseau and how he was beating up rocks and stuff. So there's a lot of stuff that I've gleaned from memories and stuff. But then we went up to Monolani Heights. That's what Tom was talking about. We went up to Monolani Heights, and I don't know how that happened, but we were up there in 1942. I do remember Dad building the house. I do remember the monkey pod tree that you can still see from Sierra Drive. That is a perfect umbrella. He planted that in 1946 or somewhere along in there, and it is still there. And they've done a lot more work.
Okay.
Yes, Dad. You're good, Dad. You got your mic back on.
Okay, I want to interrupt for a second. This is about you, but can you briefly describe Julia and tell a little bit about her husband?
Oh, Uncle Tommy. Oh my God. Aunt Jewel and Tommy wanted to adopt me, and Mom didn't let me go because I was born on the same day as Aunt Jewel.
Okay.
John Jewel and I have the same birthday.
Okay.
And so Uncle Tom was cousin to Governor King, Hawaiian family. Tommy was pretty much all Hawaiian. I don't know if he had any other blood in him or not, because he died in 1946 or 48. So I wasn't around him, but I have pictures. He had the first color moving camera. What was it? 8mm, 16mm?
Probably 8mm.
Anyway, I had it all put onto discs. I had it all put onto discs. And there's pictures of me and Tom on a tricycle and stuff like that, running up and down the driveway on Aloha Drive and stuff. That house, by the way, was still standing.
Oh, really?
Aloha Drive is still standing.
I remember Aloha Drive, yeah.
Yeah, well, and they turned it in. They turned it into a fourplex.
One of the things Shelley and I should do, if we get to come out there, we'll convert those DVDs and put those on the internet. So pictures of you on pictures of you on a tricycle in the 40s.
Oh my God. Anyway, Uncle Tom was always taking pictures of it, and I know where his grave is, but when I tried to find it, because I've got to go back up to the office and find it, because my instructions, I could not find his, because whenever I came home, Mom and I always went to Aunt Elsie and Uncle Tom, and now Aunt Jewel is buried up in Dolan.
Oh, okay.
So she's not even in Hawaii. Aunt Elsie is in Diamond Head Cemetery, and Uncle Tom is Oahu. So anyway, but Uncle Tom, and I don't remember much about it because I was so young.
Yeah.
And he died so young. But we spent a lot of time in that house, and they had koa floors in that house, and they had a narrow staircase because it was a 2-story house, very narrow staircase that we would either slip or fall down, whichever, or whatever. Beautiful. Anyway, the house had a kitchen. She had solar on that house. I don't know what kind of solar it was in 1940s, but she had solar on that house because she had an outdoor shower. It was on the outside of the house. And when we'd come back from the beach, I don't think I put any of that in there. Anyway, we would come back from the beach, and if it was getting dark, all we got was cold water because that was what you got. But her refrigerator had this great big round thing on the top, and it was solar, as I remember. And she had I mean, it was just amazing what she had in that house. She had a section over there, which is a kitchenette section, and it had a see-through door out to the living room, out to the entrance of the house and the staircase. And she had more doggone pills, and she would drink hot water, vinegar, and honey, and something else every single morning. But she would always stay in the best of shape. But that was the first time I had seen all this variety of pills. And it had built-in benches, and a table. It was all built in the kitchen. It was actually a small house, but boy, I sure had a lot of fun in that house. The other point is upstairs, they had a room, I think it was about 10 or 12 feet long, and it was very narrow. They had cabinets or something, desks on both sides, and they had a walkway through about 2 feet. It was a very narrow, and it was still in blackout. When I grew up and was in that house, it was still in blackout. And now Aunt Elsie and Uncle Charlie were up on Lurleen, and that house is still standing. They have another house down in front of it because it was such a big property. I do remember Aunt Elsie having chickens, and she cut off a chicken's head, and I went up the fig tree because the chicken was running around with blood spurting out of its head. And I was the fig tree.
Oh my gosh. Now you wrote Grandma Rogers was an Eastern Star and White Shrine, and so you were in Rainbow Girls. What was that, and what do you remember about that?
Well, yeah, that was later. That was later on. That's all part of the shrine. It's all part of the shrine operation. All of that. The D-Malay you've heard of is a D-Malay is the boys unit to the Rainbow Girls, and then Job's Daughters is another one. So it's a Eastern Star and White Shrine that Grandma belonged to.
So they're like youth groups sort of that were attached to the Shriners for the kids?
Yeah. They're all subsidiary. I guess I would call them subsidiary organizations.
Yeah, I would, Wes, because I was in D-Malay, and of course my dad was a Shriner, and then my mom was Eastern Star.
I've really never heard of that. Was it religious, or what kind of things did you all do? Was it like scouting or something?
Well, Masonic organizations, they had their rituals and all that. In fact, when we were back in DC, a lot of DC was founded by the Masons.
By Masons.
Sure, yeah, but I don't think I've ever heard of those organizations or no. I knew that the men were in the lodge and things like that, and there were Shriners, but I didn't know they had other organizations for other.
Well, you have to be a Mason. You have to be a Mason first to be a Shriner.
Right, I think that's right.
I think so. Well, and then Job's Daughters were kind of connected with Eastern Star, weren't they?
Well, yeah. So was Rainbow Girls.
Okay.
And D-Malay, I don't know who they were connected to, but they were the boys' organization.
Yeah.
Were these focused on character development and trying to cultivate?
Yeah, and they were religious. They were religious. So yeah, Tom probably knows more about that than I do, because I was already gone by the time Dad became a Shriner, and well, he became a 32nd degree Mason first,
Okay.
and you have to do all the
Yeah.
testing and all the learning and all the whatever, and
Yeah.
then you can be a Shriner. And
Right.
your
Right.
mom were big on the Shrine Hospital down on Punahou. They spent Christmases down there and a lot of time and a lot of money down at the Shriners, which they've completely rebuilt the site down there, gotten it a lot of bigger and better and stuff. But they are one of the only shrine burn units that is still functioning on a very heavy duty basis, and it takes in all of the South Pacific and Australia, and I don't know what their boundaries all are, but it's the burn unit in Chicago or somewhere back there in the east. They're thinking about closing it up because they just don't have the patience. And the shrine is big in Florida, same thing. And I presume they're taking in Europe and stuff like that, but their burn units are fantastic.
Yeah.
As well as their children's areas.
Yes.
But anyway, I had something else I was going to remember, but now I've forgotten it again. Okay, whatever. Story of my life.
At what age did you first leave Honolulu?
I graduated from high school in 1956 and came to LA. And thank God I had Uncle Jim and Aunt Marge and Steve and Roger. That's why I'm so close to them, because we spent a lot of time, and they took me in and helped me and stuff. And I mean, Grandma Rogers was down in, oh, that's what I was going to talk about. Remind me, Grandma Rogers. Grandma Rogers was down in Long Beach with a lot of her family, Sikoras, Reese, Pendletons. I'm sure I'm missing somebody else. Oh, Eastons. So yeah. Anyway, they all ended up in Long Beach. I could have been a millionaire too. They had four of them had partnership in Belmont Shore. And if you know anything about California, Belmont Shore is the hoity-toity rich bitch area. Well, they lost it all in the Depression, of course. So much. Anyway, Grandma Rogers, back to Grandma Rogers. She came over after Mom and Dad were married. So I forget what I put down. It's in the writings there somewhere. Anyway, she came over. She was there during the war and worked down at the Navy Yard. And because I have pictures of her at Aunt Jewel's and all the family pictures and stuff. And she lived with a Mrs. Brown up in Makiki, I think it was. And I found something. Oh, I know it's not in the stuff there. It's on her stuff over there in the Rogers file. It's not, but she lived with, Mom has written down that she lived with them for a while. It's toward the end of the paperwork there. And so she was in and out of Hawaii. I think Mom and Grandma finally buried the hatchet much later on in life. I don't know. It's just something that I kind of remember, that, you got the young wife and mother and the mother of the son, and everybody's got ideas about how to do things. So I just kind of remember that's always a difficult situation. So, it's just something that I remember.
So when you went to California, then did you go to work? Did you go to school?
I went to Woodbury College at that point, which is now Woodbury University. We are getting ready to merge with University of Redlands, as a matter of fact. So they unanimously elected me vice chairman. And so it's like, okay, we do Zoom meetings on that too. Anyway, so actually what I was aiming at was my section was motion picture secretary. And so my hardest job was learning shorthand and typing. Everything else I had learned in the English standard system in Hawaii, because we had a top-notch English standard system based on Eastern Seaboard colleges and schools. And you had to pass a certain. In fact, I ran into one of my classmates last Sunday at Eagle, and he was Japanese, big tall guy, Japanese, and he said, "Yeah," he said, "my older brother said tree for three, because that's Pidgin English." And so he got to go to McKinley, which is known as J School or Japanese school, and the 442nd bunch usually came out of McKinley. So in World War II. But Owen was told by his father, "Don't say tree, it is three." So Owen got to go to school with us because he said three.
Did any of your Japanese classmates or neighbors, did they get relocated during the war?
Oh
in
yes.
Hawaii?
Oh yes. I have in that writing there, I tell you about Helen Nakamura, and her father got written up by Bob Strauss. I think it's toward
side stories. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a side story. And they had the greengrocer, there's two kind of inlets that go out in Pearl Harbor. And on the submarines were across from that, but they had oil tanks on one side of that stuff. Anyway, they were all greengrocers. Anyway, her father was running a tug or some kind of ship. And the first all of us knew about it. We have a Club 56, we call it the Pineapple Express. About 30 years ago is when we all found out about Mr. Nakamoto. He was out there the day that it got bombed, and he was picking up dead bodies, burning bodies, alive bodies. He was out there. He was on duty for 2 or 3 days with no sleep, and he was picking on, because everything was burning. All the water was burning. Everything was burning, and he went over and he held up the so that the great big structure that when you go to dry dock and stuff, the great big structure that lifts the ship up or whatever it does, right. He went over and held it up because the kamikazes were going after it. And he knew that if he didn't hold it up, Pearl Harbor would be closed for years because it was very shallow. Pearl Harbor is very shallow. And so he was holding up that whole structure. None of us knew anything about it because nobody would talk about it. Mm-hmm. Nobody. Not Uncle Bob didn't talk about it. Uncle Jim didn't talk about it.
As far as how he
Uncle Al didn't talk about it.
How he got relocated, you mean, after that?
Well, yeah. As soon as Pearl Harbor got bombed, the Army was in there and moved them all out. They moved them all out. They had greengrocer farms and everything, but they moved them all out. Yeah. And she told me where they relocated to, but I don't remember where it was.
But that wasn't something that was talked about at the time, and not something you learned.
No, it wasn't. No, because everything was in chaos. Yeah. Everything was in chaos, and they rounded up some Japanese, and they took them to Honolulu, which they're making into a national memoriam now, and it's a wreck. But they only managed to get a couple of thousand Japanese because all the Japanese worked at Pearl Harbor. And we're all part of the war effort and everything else. And that was why the 442nd got started, because they were trying to round up, and Roosevelt did that. And the Haoles, the Chinese, the Filipinos, everybody over here got up in arms, and they picketed and everything else. And all the Japanese were released. The longest any of them were in a Honolulu was 6 months. Everybody over here got up in arms and picketed and protested and everything else.
So then they were allowed to just go back as civilians and then
Yes,
help with the
they
economy?
went back to all their work because they were all people who were working at Pearl Harbor. That was the biggest
Man.
employer.
That's an
And-
amazing story. I've never heard that story before.
Yeah, yeah.
I have a question. You've used the term 442nd. I don't know what that is.
That's the Go for Broke Brigade. Yeah, it was all Japanese. It was all Japanese. The most highly decorated brigade or whatever they call it.
Well, so it was a military unit then.
In World War II. They went and they took over. They liberated Italy, and they were all over. They had a massive death count, but they were all Japanese. Every single one of them was Japanese.
But they wouldn't let them fight in the Pacific, so they sent them to the European theater.
Yeah, they were on the European continent.
Okay.
Well, but the Japanese also became code breakers and stuff because they could understand. In fact, in Pearl Harbor, the day of December 7th, there were all kinds of ham operators in all of our islands out there that were calling Pearl Harbor and telling them there's something going on. We could hear them talking. A lot of them were Japanese.
Right.
And they could understand what they were saying.
Right.
Yeah.
And they kept telling Pearl Harbor, there's something going on up there.
Right.
Yeah.
They're coming your way.
Yeah.
And Pearl Harbor said, oh yeah, well, we're expecting a bunch of B-52s then or something or other.
Right.
And I mean, but the ham operators on the outer islands were all calling in to Pearl Harbor and telling them there's something going on up there.
Right. Right.
But the army and the Navy, and then of course the Navy guy, and of course all of these guys were summarily, what do you call, were relieved of command,
Right.
whatever they call it.
Yeah.
And both of them spent the rest of their lives trying to clear their name. Now the Navy admiral is the one who lined up all the damn ships.
Yeah.
And just made them sitting ducks.
Yeah.
But if you read of Newt Gingrich and Forstchen's two book thing on Pearl Harbor, it goes into the day before and the days after.
Mhm.
And it tells you how the Japanese guy, and he's been over here, by the way, he's dead now. He was over here in some of our national memorial things. And he tells how he rigged up the wooden submarine, wooden torpedoes, because Pearl Harbor was so shallow.
So shallow. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, if you read those two books, by Gingrich and Forstchen,
Huh.
it tells you a really good condensation of Pearl Harbor and what led up to it and what happened afterwards and everything else. It's fantastic. So
what happened to you after you graduated from Woodbury College?
that was the first of my marriages, and that didn't last very long. And I never got to be a motion picture secretary because what I was trying to do was go in there and be a secretary and then be a script writer and write for movies, be a script writer.
Because Hollywood was in full swing.
No, it
right?
wasn't.
Oh, really?
No, because TV had just come in 1958, 57. TV had come in and creamed the movie industry.
Huh.
So that's why I never went that way. So anyway, and then I went to work for Hawthorne Hospital. I got pregnant with Darlene. We moved into Artesia. And he was a Korean vet, and I should never have married him in the first place because he threatened to throw acid in my face. And if I didn't marry him, and of course, at 19, what kind of brain do you have that's functioning? And so, but I got out of that. That was a year and a half divorce.
Was that in college you married him or after?
No, I had just graduated, but he was still in Woodbury.
Yeah.
And so anyway, then I went to work. 1961 was a really rough financial year, recession year. And so I finally got a job at North American Rockwell, and I actually went to Audinetics out in Anaheim, and I stayed with my boss who went on up the ladder, and I was up on the front line with him when I married Chet. And I went to Cyprus and had Roger, and then I got involved in the city council and politics and stuff. And so that was a whole different ball game, because of trying to stop the developers from tearing up everything.
Now, what city council was that? What was that, Red?
That was the city council of Cyprus, California.
Huh.
I lived in Cyprus from 1966 to 1995.
Wow. And how did their city government work? Did they have a mayor, or was the city council?
Yeah, they had a mayor, and they had 5 council members, and everything west of the Mississippi generally has a council, and they jockey among themselves for position of mayor and vice mayor and stuff like that.
So did you serve as mayor as well?
Where you're located, east of the Mississippi, the mayors do all the jobs.
Right.
And I found that out when we all went to Washington, D.C. for our cities to testify on the Mentone Dam. We found out in a big hurry, because we thought somebody really important was coming in, because we were all used to having things thrown at us and be sworn at and everything else. And they don't do that they don't do that east of the Mississippi.
We have a city manager. So
well, we had a city manager too. We had a city manager that ran the city.
Okay. But the city council would rotate as far as
the city council and the planning commission, which we eventually got rid of the planning commission, but that's all right.
So what made you decide to run for the city council? And
well, I watched them tearing up Cyprus. When I moved in, had cattle ranches all over the place. Well, the developers, you have to understand that LA was moving out, and Orange County was, all the property when I moved in, you had oranges and you had tomatoes and you had all kinds of vegetables and lemons and avocados. And it was just all farm area and cattle area, and it was all being moved out so that the developers could build and build and build and build.
Right.
And Cyprus had, as so many of our cities did, they had rules and regulations. And one of them was that 6,000 square foot lots. And so the developers would come in and they would say, okay, if you'll knock it down to 2,000 square feet or whatever, we'll do such and such and such. And then they wouldn't do it. And of course, I spent 2 years along with a whole lot of other people fighting the city council and the planning commission. We kept them up till 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning and fighting them. And finally, it got down to where they weren't going to budge, and the city council and the planning commission were all in with the developers and stuff.
Right.
So I was urged by people to run, and I did. And one of my people, I don't know who it was to this day, suggested a bullet vote. I had never heard of a bullet vote. A bullet vote is simply when you've got 7 people running and 2 openings. A bullet vote, you vote for 1 person. And so you have just denied all those other 6 people of having a vote. So you just now got a more powerful vote by that bullet vote. I beat both incumbents because everybody that we had all been fighting and everything, because we were very organized. We basically all said, bullet vote Alice. Do not vote for anybody else. Bullet vote Alice. And I have lots of stories about running for council. Those were the fun days.
What did you learn as a result of your years in politics?
How little I knew.
About people, or about the law, or about what? About
government, about law, about everything. I started in 1968 with among many other things, the Anaheim Union High School District had sent Sally What's-Her-Face out from New York, from SECAS, to institute the sex education program. And I will merely say, I never knew. I was 32 and had 2 children, and I never knew what you could do with cucumbers. That's what they were teaching, among many other things. So the fight was on, and the fight is still on about the pornography in our schools, etc. So that's a whole nother section. I mainly spent the first 2 years on the council fighting the developers, and it was a 4-1 council. And finally, 2 years into it, Don Hudson got on, and so then it became 3-2. We had developer people and the Democrat on our we're both Democrats, was his brother was a UAW union member, and that was when we learned about how to dishonest elections, because we went in 1980 to the Orange County Registrar of Votes and told him how it had been done in our city. So I've been fighting election fraud since 1980.
Wow.
And it's just gotten terribly worse. But back to the council. So the big fight came with, we had a wonderful city manager who was smart, and they had really sectioned out the city into commercial, highway commercial, residential, multifamily, schools, whatever. It was all planned out. And all of it was being destructed by the developers coming in and paying all these great big bucks to the council and the planning commission, of which I exposed the planning commission member and got him fired. And same with some of the city council members. I went after them all. And I was not well received, let me tell you. Anyway, about 2 years later, it got down to where they were rezoning our whole southern area, which was to be industrial commercial, and that was to be our tax base.
Right.
Because families and multifamily are not tax bases. They're a loss. They're a big loss because of schools and lights and everything else that you need for residential.
Right.
So they were rezoning, and so they were trying to take the rest of it. They were also after the Armed Forces Reserve Center that was on the opposite side, that had been there since 1925 or 30, something like that, and they were after that. And this particular, they had already rezoned south of the channel into multifamily and residential. And those people were all screaming and yelling because the Armed Forces Reserve had jets and helicopters and everything else coming over and doing their thing, right? So it was a triangular piece of property off the runway. So there was a piece here and a piece here and a piece here. So basically, I put together a plan, and I knew it was our last chance to win. And I don't remember how I did it. I didn't write it down. I should have written it down, whatever. Anyway, I had Warshaw standing in front of me, and this was the last ditch attempt to keep them from taking the Armed Forces Reserve Center. And whatever I did, I put it out there, and I said, you've got to make up your mind. Whatever I did, I forced him. It seemed like he stood there for 2 hours, but he didn't. It was probably 5 minutes. I had sweat trickling down off my forehead. I had sweat trickling under my arms. Sweat. I almost couldn't breathe. In any case, he fell for it. And what I had done is I had outfoxed him and forced all the other council. They were put in a box and they couldn't do anything about it. And I outfoxed him.
And that saved the armed forces?
It saved the Armed Forces Reserve Center. It also stopped all the rezoning going on down there.
Wow. Wow.
And
Wow.
of course, later on, one of my Cypress Citizens Association, and he eventually came on the council too, came up to me and he said, "You cut that awful goddamn close, didn't you?" I said, "Oh, jeez, I'm still shaking." Millie Spence and Mary and I would go down after the council meeting because these would last until 2 o'clock in the morning too. And we would go down to the Golden Ox down in Garden Grove. And as soon as I would walk in the door, the bartender would start putting up the shots of bourbon on the counter. And I'd come in there and I'd put 3 of them down and then I'd stop shaking. But
my
it
gosh.
was just a fight. It was a fight all the time against the developers. And toward the end I got reelected, went to Washington, D.C. to testify about the Mentone Dam. I was always fighting developers. I was always fighting corruption, a lot of cleaning out in the city of Cypress, and just trying to break up that whole bunch. They were a group that just hung on, just like Washington, D.C. And I just went to Washington, D.C. and I've had a hate on for Washington, D.C. ever since. Anyway,
you have researched so much of our family. Where did your feistiness and your willingness and desire to get in the ring politically with
well, I
these?
have news for you. Glenda is following in my footsteps. She just
Oh.
called this morning and told me about the election committee meeting that she had yesterday with South Dakota, yada, yada. And I told her, I said, I am so glad to hear that somebody is following in my footsteps. My mother was always involved. In fact, I went to we have an old legislator named Pat Psyche. And a year and a half ago, I went to a function and I had my name tag on, Alice Rogers. And she looked at me. I went up to her. I didn't say anything. She looked at my name tag and then she looked at me and she looked at my name tag again. And I said, "Pat, my mother worked for you all the time." And she said, she says, that's why you're Alice Rogers. And so my mother stood on the corner of Harding and 16th Avenue for a year because she wanted a 4-way stop put in because it was such a dangerous area. She stood there, rain, sun, hurricane, whatever.
With like a sign or what did
Yeah, she wanted a 4-way stop put in.
But did she
And
have
by
a sign?
God, they put it in, and that 4-way stop is still there.
Wow.
So, but my mother was definitely an organizer.
There you go.
We have good genes.
Yeah, back to the city council. I have to tell you something else. I was up against a lot of opposition from my own council. There were a lot of us conservatives, ladies that got in, and we were called councilmen. And that's another story. But anyway, about midterm of my election, I was elected to the Orange County League of Cities. I was on many county organizations, and it's listed further on, not in that paperwork that you have, but I was the second woman president in 50 years of the Orange County League of Cities. The first one was a lady from Newport Beach. And I served out my term and stuff. And then in 1980, my Democrat Union friend got Don Hudson, or not Don Hudson, got me and yeah, it was Don Hudson. Yeah, got both of us and threw us out. So that was it.
Okay, well, how did you come back to Hawaii? And then I want to ask you some things about Pele and some of the Hawaiian spiritualism that you've learned about as a result of being there. When did you come back to Hawaii? What was your decision?
Well, 1995, I left and I went up to Minden, Nevada and fooled around up there, got involved in politics up there and stuff, and came home in 2000 because I would come home every year. And came home in 2000 and saw that mom and dad were not doing real well. By that time, the same time that I moved to Nevada, they moved out of the house that they had had up on Monterey Place for 50 years. They moved into one Kalakaua. And so, which was a senior living place.
Right.
And I took the family over there because I figured it's the last time that you're going to see my parents, because I knew time was getting short.
And we had been over there in 96 to see them. That's my memory of them when Shelley and I were on our honeymoon.
Yeah.
So about 4 years before that.
Yeah, they were doing okay. They were in the one Kalakaua by that time. Anyway, so back in 2001, I was over there, and I could see that time was really getting short. And so I talked to my classmates and I said, will you help me get back? Because I said, I'm going to have to walk away from Nevada and just leave everything. I'm going to have to walk away and leave it all. And will you help me find a place and put me up for a while? And so, yeah. So I came over in November of 2001 and became the second caregiver for my parents. And that was when Tom's daughter-in-law, Cheryl, married to Glenn, came over for a month studying at Kapiolani for her. And she's now, I know, a big shot up there in Tacoma and stuff, or Seattle, I mean. But anyway, she came over to learn all that stuff and get on the, so she was over here. Mom died in 2002 in February, and I just put her on hold and got her a service and all that stuff and did everything. And when I had to go back to the mainland, because all of my financial stuff and everything was on the mainland, and I told my dad, Dad, I had a big note on the wall, and it said, wait for me. I will be back on whatever date it was. Wait for me. He did, 4 days. And I was down in 1K, and one of their friends was on a cruise, and she said, come on down and stay at my apartment. And the lady called me, the caregiver of Pat Martin called me and said, get down here. And so she kept giving him morphine, and his last words to me were, are you okay, Alice? Will you be okay? And I'm just blown away. And I said, Dad, go be with Mom, because in our family, we see things, Wes. Mom, before she died, was in a second bedroom. And the caregivers told me about all the people she was talking to. And I said, oh yeah, that's all her sisters and brothers. And there was one guy that she was talking to that I don't know who it was, but I do remember when I was going through stuff with my mother, I said, who's this? Who's this? It is way back. This is way back in the 30s before she came away. I said, Mom, who's it? She slammed the book on my hand.
Oh, so that
I don't know who it was.
Okay.
And she was talking to him. She was talking to Aunt Jules. She was talking to Elsie. She was talking to everybody that had gone before her. And the caregivers were telling me that. And I said, oh yeah, she's talking to the family. My dad dies. Guess who's he's talking to? He's talking to Mom.
Wow.
So it's
but how wonderful you could be there for that time.
It's in the family. Anyway, I was there when he died, and then I did the big shrine thing. Fortunately, I have classmates who sing and do things, and so fortunately I have a lot of people that I could count on to help me through everything, right. and tell me where to go to get the caterers and everything else.
Yes. Wow.
So, but it was a good time. Now, I didn't tell you about when Mom died, because when Mom died, I was up in an apartment. My classmate had got me an apartment up in Paoa Valley, which we were so provincial when I grew up. that if you lived in an area and you knew your area, but you didn't know anybody else's area. Well, Paoa Valley, I had never been in. I had no idea. I mean, other than the fact that it's across from Punch Bowl. You know, I drove past it. So my classmate gets me an apartment up there on the first floor of Mr. Morioka's house. And that's where Cheryl, he loaned me a single bed for Cheryl because we were down there and we were chasing all the B-52s off the walls because there were just loads and loads of cockroaches and stuff. And so we were chasing the B-52s. Well, when
that's what you call the cockroaches?
Yeah, B-52s because they fly. Anyway, and they were huge. They fly, B-52s.
Okay.
Anyway, so I'm lying. I've gotten a blow up bed from Costco or somebody, and I'm lying. Anyway, I get cold. It's about 2:00 in the morning. I get cold, and I get colder and colder and colder. I'm grabbing. I have basically nothing. I'm taking all the clothes out of the closet and putting all the clothes on top of me. I'm still shaking and shivering and shaking and shivering.
Uh-oh.
And the dog across the street's barking too. So anyway, about 6:00 in the morning, I warmed up and I stopped shaking. Well, I had the cell phone turned off because I had been awake all night long. When I finally turned it on, it's my brother on the phone trying to tell me that mom had died. And I said, when did she die? Because her body had already been taken out. She died at 6:00 in the morning. I had been fighting. And I did the same thing with Aunt Jewel. I was in California standing at a Xerox machine at 6:00 at night, working on a project, and I got violently ill. Flu, and oh my God, it was just I'm standing there holding onto the copier, shaking. And then it went away. I get home, there's a phone call. Mom's on the phone. Aunt Jewel has died. When did she die? It's in the family.
Yeah. Well, that's a spiritual connection.
It's in the family. I'm not the only one in this family that's had it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay. One more question. I want to ask you about Hawaii and Pele. I remember being with you, seeing some pictures.
I took you out to Mokuleia, and I think you saw some of the flying surfboards, whatever they call them. I forget what they call them. Anyway, Pele, of course, I didn't take you to the Mormon church because they have two great big mosaics out there in Laie. And one of them is the Hawaiian princess going up to the top of the volcano and challenging Pele. And that was when the Christian church became, the church and all the priests and everything, kahus and kahunas and everything else were all pissed off about everything. But, the fact that we see Pele as an old woman with a dog or a very beautiful young woman up on Saddle Road, I have got people, and there's loads of people over here who have seen Pele, and they've gotten Pele in the car with them, and then she disappears. So this is a place where when you walk, and well, when I bought this house, I had a shaman come in here and go through this house. Before I ever moved in, I had the shaman go through this house because night marchers come through here. And I didn't know I didn't even know about them at that point. But the night marchers I knew about down in Kaka'ako.
What are night
and
marchers?
I knew about the night marchers over in Kualoa. They're all ancestors. They're ancestors. And so you can see them coming. You can look up at the side of Manoa Valley and the whole line. You can see the torches. I kid you not. of them, and they're going down to Kaka'ako. And if you happen to be caught out there, you better have a relative or something to speak for you, or you have a heart attack. Over in Kualoa, the night marchers come through over there. And there are all kinds of car accidents and heart attacks and everything else. The night marchers go through there too.
Mm.
Big night marcher. Then I found out in Mililani, they come through here too, as well as Kapapa Valley, which is right next to me. And I make sure that I'm not out there, that I'm off of that road before 12 o'clock at night.
What did the shaman tell you when you got him to come to your place?
Well, the shaman said the house was not infected or anything like that. It was okay. So well, I found out later the night, I'm not on the night marcher parade route, but still yet, you don't know who had the house before. And so I had it purified.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know, I believe, and I was a kid. We went up to the Pali, and, you know, we talk about pork, and you better have pork in the car for Peli. And because if not, your car stops and you're just stopped and dead in the water. I mean, these things happen.
Wow.
There's a guy that he's dead now, but he wrote about all the night marchers and all the various and sundry things. He's got a number of books down there where he's written about. I've seen them. And
this is why I wanted to ask you about it, because I remember hearing a little bit about it. Yeah.
I mean, I haven't seen them personally, but I have certainly felt them.
Mm-hmm.
And we went up to Pali, and there was an old wreck of a house up there, and it's all gone now, of course, with the new tunnel and everything. But all 4 or 5 of us came out of there with our hair standing straight up and running for our lives, because we don't know what the hell was up there, but something was up there. Mm-hmm. And my little Japanese classmate, Norma, who doesn't believe in anything, she's a Buddhist, for God's sakes. She goes over to Diamond Head Cemetery, where Aunt Elsie's buried, at night, and her headlights shine on the big statue of Jesus that they have right there. She was haunted for the next 3 years. Rocks were thrown at the windshield. Rocks were thrown at the car. Tires were cut. I mean, she had a shaman come in. She had a Buddhist come in. She had all kinds of. Finally, had a Hawaiian guy come in, and finally got rid of him. And she's somebody who does not believe.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, this is an ancient place. Right. And you take any of this lightly, mm-hmm. You do so at your own peril.
Mm-hmm. Well, how wonderful that you're still connected with some of your classmates, that they were able to help you get back to Hawaii, to take care of your parents, to be there, and to be able to make those connections with family. And it sounds like you're pretty happy having traded in Nevada and Cyprus for Honolulu.
Yeah, well, I'm looking at time is getting very short here, so I'm looking at trying to figure out what to do. Mm-hmm. You know, yeah. It is what it is, Wesley. Yeah. All things come to an end.
We've got to enjoy the time that we have. So.
But I am just delighted that we're having this conversation. I mean, the two of you, and I may have some, once we get to the reunion, we're going to have to get together and elaborate on a couple of these things.
Yeah, well, I'm just full of stories, Tom, just full of stories.
I appreciate you taking the time, because I think it is, yeah, it's just so important for us to preserve our stories and to get to know our history, you know, and you know so much of our history.
Well, and I've learned so much more with all of this stuff and finding, and I thank my mother and my grandmother because they saved stuff. And I went in there and I started taping my grandmother, and I don't know why I didn't do it a hell of a lot earlier.
Oh, you do? So you have some recordings of her?
No, well, I don't. I transcribed it into writing. Okay. I transcribed. Oh, by the way, I meant to tell you one other thing. I always thought that on the Rogers side, since I already knew all about the Fryer side, I thought on the Rogers side that I probably had horse thieves and train robbers. as it turns out, with the help of Valine and my girlfriend back on the East Coast, I find out that Bixby Rogers was with George Washington in the Revolutionary War in New Jersey.
Wow.
Wow. Wow.
Wow.
And Bixby Rogers' son, Philemon Rogers, and I can't remember who the other one is, were all in the Civil War.
Hmm.
On the Union
Interesting.
side, as a matter of fact.
Well,
Interesting.
yeah, good for them.
We've got
So-
that kind of genealogy and tracking, and my wife Shelley has gotten in. There's a series that's on PBS where they research the history of
Oh
the
yeah,
ancestors
I've
of
seen
people.
that.
Yeah, and they learn about that, and those are some really powerful stories, and I think it's one of those things that we need to encourage the next
Well,
generation.
Valine, tell your wife to get on Family Search. It's free. It's the Mormon Church in Utah.
Right.
And it's free, and
Yeah.
you sign on and you put a password in and stuff, and that's how I found. I actually have a picture of Bixby Rogers' gravestone,
Wow. Yeah.
and that's how I found Rogers' grandfather and grandmother, because they came over on the boat from Georgia and Poland.
Wow.
Georgia being in Russia
Russian
or
Georgia.
whichever.
Yeah. Shelley's I don't know, great grandfather had the plantation next to George Washington's at
For
Mount
God's sake.
Vernon. And so her dad had done some of this genealogical research, and the computer the dad has at his house still, I think, has the joined genealogy files with Shelley's family and the Friars and Henleys and what they've done. So we've got to make sure we don't lose those records and encourage others to connect and learn about their family history too. So, all right. Well, I think
when and if you and Shelley come over here, you can get into all the Night Marcher books.
Oh my!
And then Glenn, his first name is Glenn. And there was a drive-in theater down below Monloney Heights. It's gone now, but it's by a cemetery. And there was a drive-in movie there, and there was a lady that haunted the what do you call the luncheonette thing, the place where you sell food, the lunch counter, whatever.
Lunch counter, yeah.
Anyway, and she moved over to the Kahala Theater across the way once they took the theater down.
Oh,
so they're out there. I'm telling you.
Well, you just hang on for a bit longer, and we'll just, we're going to have this reunion this summer, and we need to set up another trip to Hawaii. We haven't been there in a while.
Well, I've got a 2-story house, and the second floor is unoccupied, other than the office.
And we happen to be school teachers and have some time off in the summer, So
yes, I know. I've got a New York buddy coming in late September, I think, and Glenda and Bob are coming over here, but they're leaving by Thanksgiving, so I'm not having Thanksgiving with them as usual. But one of my Hanai sons and his wife are supposed to come over around Thanksgiving too, so it'll be interesting.
All right. Well, sounds good. Well, my computer is about dead, and so it is time to sign off. So,
well, thank you so much, Wes and Tom. It was so good seeing you, and I'm glad you're taking care of yourself, because I'm gonna have to hurt you if you're not.
yes, he does his sit and be fit, and he keeps his exercise going. So that's
Yes.
good.
Yeah.
Well, that's good, and no orange juice in the morning.
Okay.
Oh yeah, she may start getting you with some fancy, vinegar and rum, or what did you say that drink was?
No, it's vinegar and honey.
There you go.
Hot water and honey and vinegar.
Orange juice sounds a lot
no
better
bourbon.
to me than that.
Oh my God. Aunt Jewel, I used to look at Aunt Jewel and go, oh my God.
Oh, how funny.
Well, we'll
All right.
see you shortly. Bye-bye.
All right.
Love you both.
All right,
Bye-bye.
love you all. Thank you so
Mhm.
much, Wes and
Uh-huh.
Tom.
Bye-bye.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.